Hello, welcome to DCQ Dublin City Questions, a podcast where DCU students sit down with academic experts to explore how big ideas from international relations and politics to law and media shape the world around us. We are here to bridge theory and reality and bring university discussions to life, one question at a time. This DCQ Dublin City Questions. I'm the host, Peter Lawlor, one of the student hosts here at DCQ. In this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Moign Khawaja, a postdoctoral research fellow who specializes in international relations and security studies. Also recently authored the book Islamic State, Media and Propaganda: Performances of the Visual Caliphate, which is an open access book that will be shared in the description of the episode. Hello, Dr. Khawaja. How are you? I hope
Very good
everything's going.
yourself.
Oh,
How
fine,
are
thank you,
you?
fine, thank you. So, I suppose we better get into it. Uh, Currently in Syria, the new president, Ahmed al-Sharaa, he's recently launched a new offensive against the Syrian Democratic Forces in the northeast, the SDF, and against the YPG. So,
Mhm.
I suppose could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, of course. So in terms of the latest offensive against the Syrian Kurds, namely the YPG and the SDF in general, um, this has been long in the making because once Ahmad al-Sharaa, along with other jihadi leaders, when he took over Damascus, the only other entity that could have challenged his rule was the YPG, right? And their rivalry goes back to 2013 or say 2012 when the Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad handed over territory um, to the YPG because they were not interested in controlling that territory anymore. It was far-fetched from what we call as the backbone of Syria, starts from Aleppo all the way to Damascus and includes the coast as well, which is the Alawi belt. So at that time, because the regime was getting weaker and weaker, they came up with the strategy of maintaining control over the backbone of Syria, and the rest of the territory could have been handed to the Kurds, which they took up and they established their canton. Now, that canton has been mostly unchallenged, even though there were incursions by the Turks and Turkish-backed groups. There was one in 2018. They took Afrin out. They took Afrin under their control. They kicked out the YPG from there, and there were some massacres of Kurdish people that took place there. Thousands of Kurds were displaced, and they moved to Aleppo, the neighborhoods of Sheikh Massoud and Ashrafia, and around that, which are Kurdish-dominated neighborhoods. So there was an influx of the people from Afrin. And then once ISIS one was on its last legs, the Kurds were pushed out of Jarablus and other towns along the Turkish border. They wanted to make sure that they don't have control over the entire border with Turkey. The Kurds don't have a control over the entire border with Turkey. So they installed their own groups such as Sultan Murad and a few others. So yeah, coming back to Ahmad al-Shara, when he took control of Damascus on the chessboard, he noticed that it's only the Kurds who are a formidable force, and they have some outside support as well. The Americans were, of course, backing them, especially during their fight against ISIS, and so were the Russians. The Russians were backing them as well. Russians recently vacated their base in Kamishli, which is still under Kurdish control, as much as I understand. So these two foreign powers were backing the Kurds. But Ahmad al-Shara, he wanted to take control, not only because that makes him more powerful, but also this is Turkish, on Turkish bidding. Turkey wants to make sure that there is no Kurdish regional government, unlike uh, northern Iraq, where there is a Kurdistan regional government, and the Kurds are somehow powerful there, and they share power with other groups. And you would ask, why is that the case when they can tolerate the Kurdistan regional government in Iraq. Why not here? And Turkey counters that by saying YPG is very close to PKK. In fact, they call it the remnants of PKK, which is not true, of course. Um, Historically, there have been different strands, but of course, YPG follows Abdullah Öcalan's ideology, PKK ideology, which he himself has abandoned in the last number of years, right? So I think Turkey uses that as a pretext to paint YPG as a reincarnation of PKK or a continuation of PKK, which really is not true. The Kurds have never demanded independence. They asked for a confederation, which is autonomy in some ways, but not necessarily complete autonomy either.
I see. And can I ask, Professor, Doctor, apologies, that as we might know, Ahmed al-Sharaa, he was a former member of Al-Qaeda
Yep.
and one of the head commanders of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which was formally dissolved last January. But
Mhm.
do you think that there might still be some ethnic or Islamic con strife that might reemerge due to reconquest? Because if history serves me correct, for instance, when ISIS conquered or infiltrated Mosul and such near the north eastern and Kurdish regions, there were many massacres of Yazidi people. So do you think a repeat of that could happen?
It has happened. So it's not a question of will it happen, but it's a question of how did it happen and how many people were killed and who are the effectees of that and how it's going to reshape Syria once again. So if you look at the trajectory of Ahmad al-Shara's power and his consolidation of his grip on power in Syria, at first there were the massacres of Alawi people, which took place in a number of cities on the Syrian coast on the Mediterranean Sea. So there were a few in Banias, there were a few in Latakia, and they destroyed Bashar al-Assad's father's mausoleum in Qardaha, Hafiz al-Assad's mausoleum. They burned it down to crisp. They urinated on his grave, and some people accused that they dug the grave and they took the bones out. And that was just like a humiliation ritual for the Alawis. It was just a signal to show to the world and to Syrians in particular that they are the new rulers and they will rule as they deem fit, right?
Mm,
So the massacres unfolded there, and some estimates put it somewhere around 7,000 to 10,000 people. But that wasn't noticed because there is this conception that Alawi people naturally support Bashar or the regime. They were part of the regime, which is not entirely true. Of course, there were Alawi people who were in the intelligence or in certain formations of the military, but it's not like every Alawi was supporting. And even if they were supporting, it doesn't mean that their lives don't matter, you know? So that was ignored. No one raised an eyelid over that. And after that, it was the Druze people who were targeted, right? Now, that somehow gained international traction because Israel was interested in somehow leveraging this to their advantage and to show that there are groups in Syria who support us, which they need somehow. They need the legitimacy and they don't want to paint this conflict as an Arab versus Jew or Arab versus Israel conflict. So that came in handy for Israel, and somehow their intervention managed to stop the conflict in southern Damascus. Now, the third was the Kurds. So the Kurds already knew that they are on the chipping block, and it's just a matter of time. There were some clashes that started from almost after the fall of the regime. There were tensions, especially in Aleppo, right? Because all of Aleppo didn't fall. The neighborhoods that are controlled by the Kurds or were controlled by the Kurds because now they have vacated them, they were resisting moves by HTS and other aligned militias. And historically, they have been resisting them. So this animosity doesn't start from now. It has always been there. The Kurds always resisted the jihadis in all shapes and sizes and flavors, whatever you want to call them, right? But this time, what happened was there was a lack of American support because Donald Trump came strongly in favor of Ahmad al-Sharaa, right? He expressed public sympathy. Of course, they left sanctions, and the bounty on his head was removed as well. So Ahmad al-Sharaa had like a free hand to deal with the Kurds as he deemed fit. And that was quite problematic for the Kurds. I think they lost their support. Russia was no longer in a position to support them. So yeah, they just found themselves quite isolated, and that's why they lost so much territory in a matter of days, and they had to sign a ceasefire. And now I think they have almost acceded to the demands of Ahmad al-Sharaa, which includes incorporation of Kurdish militia on individual basis. The Kurdish demands was that it should be as a division within the Syrian army, right? But Ahmad al-Sharaa said, no, you have to make it individual so that there is no fragmentation within the military. Um, so yeah, massacres
Interesting.
took place as a result of this latest round of war between the two sides.
Hmm. And tell me, Doctor, seeing as how relevant Islamist holdovers or Islamist influence might be due to the fact that Ahmed al-Sharaa was a former member of Al-Qaeda and did found HTS. Recently, you helped author a book, The Islamic State Media and Propaganda, The Visual Caliphate. So, can you
Performances
tell us
of
a
the
bit about
visual
that?
caliphate.
Hmm?
Performances of the visual caliphate.
Performances of the Visual Caliphate. My apologies. Can you
Yeah.
tell us a bit about the new book?
Sure, sure. Yeah. So this book showcases how ISIS portrayed themselves as a modern Islamic state, right? So it's about the performances, how they performed as a modern state in their official videos. So for the sake of this book, not just this book, so it stems out from my PhD thesis. Um, and for research purposes, I gathered a data set of 374 videos, and if you play them back to back, its duration is somewhere around 64 hours. And I divided those videos in four case studies. So some of the videos were population themed, where ISIS was showing they have a population. There are two segments of that population. One is the locals, they call them Ansar, and the others were immigrants or Muhajirin, and that's based on the Islamic model, the early Islamic model that Muhammad founded, Prophet Muhammad founded. So they showed they have population. Now, the other criteria for qualifying as a state is territory. So ISIS showed they have territory as well. And when it came to displays of territory, they not only showed that they control territory, but this is how they are um, taking control over other territories. So before, like in some videos, they would show this is the map of the territory they're going to take over, right? They show maps, they show aerial footage from drones, and then they show how they stage the attack, right? Armed formations, tanks, APCs, all of them go together. There is usually a suicide bombing, or there are some stormtroopers who invade, say, an army base, or it could be a city, could be any location, and then they show how they overrun that place and they kill the surrendered fighters, right? They take over the war booty, and after that, they show how it's incorporated into the caliphate. So they showed the whole transition of taking over territory, right? And at times, they were against the idea of putting a map of the caliphate, but when it suited their narrative, they put out a map. So they said, our territory is 30 times the size of Qatar and as big as the UK, right?
Hmm.
Which is quite substantial. Then coming to governance, they showed that they are not just a government, but a modern, efficient government on top of that, right? So they showed they have law and order. They showed they have an administration and a bureaucracy, right? And a services department where they are paving new roads, picking up trash, and so on and so forth, right? So these were the three branches of governance that they showed. And then when it came to foreign policy, they had a very pronounced foreign policy, right? Not just towards the neighboring countries, but also about foreign powers who they were fighting against, right? So it was a comprehensive display of governance, unprecedented. No other non-state actor has ever done that before. And I encapsulated that in a book. It's based on 374 videos, as I said. And in that book, I make the argument that this was like ISIS put out these videos and performed as a state in these videos to convince people who are under their control that it's a modern government and they are its subjects, right? So that was a way of gaining legitimacy, right? And for people who were abroad, who were ISIS supporters or had some kind of sympathy, was to entice them to come and join ISIS because ISIS needed that manpower, right? And who would be the best if not its diehard supporters who cross um, a number of borders, right? And migrated to ISIS territory, left everything behind, right? They are supposed to be the diehard supporters. So that's what I make the case in this book that it was done not just for legitimacy, but also for propaganda and state building purposes.
Yes, and I read the book myself, and I found many interesting things that caught my eye, such as how ISIS had its own media branch, its own news media, the Al Hayat Media Center, and
Mhm.
actually produce full-fledged movies such as Answering the Call, Light or Heavy, and
Yeah.
Procession of Light.
Hmm.
And I'm just curious, Doctor. Obviously, we know ISIS still has lingering influence and even a lingering presence within Syria and Iraq and a lingering influence around the world. And so we know, for instance, like I was saying, Ahmed al-Sharaa, the current president of Syria,
Yeah.
he uh, he was obviously affiliated with Al-Qaeda, who was affiliated with ISIS. I believe Al-Qaeda was actually taken over in 2016 by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi after,
In 2013.
sorry, in 2013 after its leader al-Zarqawi was killed in a missile strike, I believe.
Zahawi was killed in 2006. Yeah.
Yes. And so could you tell us a bit about al-Shara's past?
Hmm.
Because obviously, with this lingering Islamic influence from ISIS,
Hmm.
uh, it might be a bit interesting to learn how al-Shara's own Islamist past might influence his present day actions.
Absolutely. It's worth asking who is Ahmad al-Sharaa or formerly Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani, right? What's his transformation and how much of the past is going to have an effect on his future actions. Now, in terms of Ahmad al-Sharaa, he was born in Saudi Arabia, right? And his father to this day is still a Ba'athist, right? Like he has not said that openly that he's an Islamist himself, right? Unlike his son, who is a jihadi. So in early, or I think in late 2000s, he moved to Iraq for the jihad, right? And he was arrested by the Americans, and he was in jail for, I think, 1 year or 2 years. It's very shadowy. We still don't know exactly what really happened there, but he was in prison, and that's where he met Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and other IS higher ups who later became the commanders and the policy makers, right? The movers and shakers, if you like. And he was so close to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi that he entrusted him to be sent to Syria to do the scouting and to set up a shop for ISIS in in Syria, right? ISIS was still making inroads in Iraq and some parts of Syria, but he was sent as an official scout, so to speak, right? So he comes to Syria and he sees the landscape very fertile for spreading their brand of revolution, which is jihadi revolution, right? So he sets up his shop. Now, of course, he has good connections here. He's Syrian himself, and Syrians usually trust Syrians, and Iraqis usually trust Iraqis. Even if you are a jihadi, that has proven to be the case. So the Iraqi ISIS members were mostly trustful of the Iraqis and were a bit suspicious of the Syrians and vice versa. Anyway, he comes here, sets up his shop, And when Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi asks him to report, and he says, I report to uh, al-Zawahiri, Ayman al-Zawahiri, right? So you didn't ask me about anything. You do your job there, and I am the new emir of Syria, and I only report to al-Zawahiri, which really irked and angered Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. So he said, "Okay, we will deal with you," and he sent a number of fighters to find and kill him, right? So perhaps he might have survived some assassination attempts, but he goes on to establish Jabhat al-Nusra, right? Which was the Syrian wing of Al Qaeda to start with, right? And at that time, when jihadis were traveling to the Caliphate in droves, they had two options, clearly two options. One was to support Jabhat al Nusra, and the other one was to support ISIS. Now, Jabhat al Nusra at that time was a smaller group, and they were not so prominent. Of course, they were known because they were highly organized. There was not much corruption between the ranks, and they were more ideological. They were more committed compared to other FSA factions or other jihadis, right? But ISIS was rising, right? So it was more lucrative for a jihadi to join ISIS because they could see the prospects, right? ISIS was going heavy on the caliphate narrative and state building, and the whole world was afraid of them, right? So for a jihadi, it was like a no-brainer to join ISIS because they are on the ascendant. The prospects look better, and ISIS was, of course, more organized as well. So Ahmad al-Sharaa, he gets into this internecine fighting with other jihadi factions and manages to overpower a number of them, including Ahrar al-Sham, which around that time was a major force, right? But there were a number of assassinations, most likely carried out by HTS members on the directives of Ahmad al-Sharaa, and Ahrar al-Sham was weakened to the point that they dissolved themselves and merged in HTS and a few other factions, jihadi factions, right? So he has been quite shrewd. One thing about Ahmad al-Sharaa that can be argued is the fact that he's pragmatic or he's shrewd. He knows how to play his cards, right? Unlike Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who was quite stubborn, and he opened fronts against every single enemy, and that's what perhaps brought down ISIS. Of course, their ideology was rotten to the core, but sometimes it's not about the ideology per se. It's about how well you defend yourselves and how smart you are on the battlefield. You can't fight all the enemies at the same time, right? Ahmad al-Sharaa was quite smart because he managed to rally the nationalists in FSA and in the Syrian revolution. He struck some deals with the Kurds as well, that you don't attack us and we don't attack you. That has happened in the past. And then, of course, the decisive factor was his alliance with the Turks, right? So he was willing to sit down with them, take their diktat, listen to what they have to say, and enter a strategic alliance with the Turks. That is the game changer. Because at one point in 2018, HTS could have been defeated by the Syrian regime. The Russians were intent on doing that on, of course, Bashar al-Assad's request, right? But Turkey was bent on saving these people because they were doing Turkey's bidding. Turkey did not want any kind of power remaining for Bashar and his regime. He wanted that regime either to be gone or to be in some sort of agreement with other jihadis, like a power sharing agreement where the regime doesn't have a stranglehold over power. So yeah, Ahmad al-Sharaa, as much as a brutal past he has, but he has also proven himself to be quite shrewd and a pragmatic leader. And that's why now he's shaking hands with Donald Trump and General Petraeus, and goes to Russia and praising the Russians. He's a diplomat as well. And that's the
Hmm.
decisive factor.
Hmm. Oh, I have to absolutely agree with you on that, Doctor. I mean, just recently, uh, Saudi Arabian firms and US firms joined together to form a consortium
Yeah.
for oil and gas exploration, and Hunt Energy and Ardent LNG partnered with Taka for 4 to 5 exploration blocks.
Yeah.
And that's all for exploring the recently conquered, so to
Yeah.
speak, territories of the northeast.
Yeah.
And in
Yeah.
regarding to al-Shara's new conquests within former Kurdistan, on
Hmm.
the 22nd of January of this year, the Irish Independent reported that dozens of former ISIS brides tore down
Hmm.
fences and escaped
Yeah.
from the al-Hol prison camp
Yeah.
within northeastern uh, YPG SDF controlled Syria.
Hmm.
And there are roughly 9,000 IS members and 40,000 of their relatives within that area, which I believe 10,000 of them, of IS prisoners, have already been moved from Syria to Iraq.
Yeah.
So I suppose, could you tell us a bit about what you think the future of of these IS prisoners could be?
That's $1 million question. That's a great question. Um, and it's a bit hard to predict because um, some of them have been moved. Now, we don't know what the criteria was to move these people. Most likely, they were the most dangerous former ISIS fighters, right? There is speculation that they were offered a choice. If they could give up on their caliphate ideology, then that's fine. That would be okay. But some of them perhaps might have refused that. We don't want to join HTS. We don't want to be part of the new government. We would rather die as jihadis, and let us be. So perhaps they are the ones who were moved to Iraq because they can be guarded securely. And the Iraqis are going to make sure that there is no escape for them. And perhaps they might be putting them on trial and punishing them and sentencing them and so on and so forth. Um, the future of the people who are still in al-Hol and other camps, it's open to speculation. There were reports that some of them were freed because they renounced ISIS ideology and they pledged to be part of HDS or the jihadist ideology, right? Some of the women um, were freed from these camps. Maybe they were given to the fighters, right? Because perhaps the women prefer to live with one of the fighters rather than rotting in the jail, right? It's very shadowy, very shady. We don't know what really happened. There has been no investigation, and we don't even know the numbers because the numbers are given by the new Syrian regime, um, which is complicit in holding these people and somehow forcing them to join HTS, like give up on ISIS and join HTS without any um, background checks and whatsoever, right? So it's open to speculation now. If Syria were to fall or were to undergo another round of chaos, that would uh, that would just give these fighters an opportunity to regroup and to stage another revolution and bring ISIS back. That would be like ISIS 2.0, 3.0, whatever you want to call it. So it's precarious and it's open to speculation. We really don't know what really happened or what's happening now, what's the situation on the ground.
I suppose only time can truly tell what lies for Syria in the future, but so far it seems like al-Sharaa is staying on top for now anyway. But I
He is
think that's all we really have time for. So I'd like to thank you so much again, Dr. Moign
welcome.
Khawaja, and I look forward to reading once again and having everyone read your new book. So thank you very much, Doctor. I appreciate this greatly.
You're very welcome, Peter. Thanks very much. And see you next week.
Thanks for listening to DCQ, Dublin City Questions. We're DCU students sit down with academic experts to explore how big ideas shape the world around us. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow and share it with a friend. I'm your host, Peter Lawlor, and I'll be back next time with another conversation that bridges theory and reality, one question at a time.